Hello, my name is Virgil, and today I want to talk about Gene Wolfe's The Borrowed Man. He's known for writing books that are meant to be reread. He leaves puzzles and sort of conundrums, sort of little mysteries sprinkled throughout the narrative. And The Borrowed Man may be no exception, although I'm not certain. Let me give you the setup. In the 22nd century, our civilization has retained many familiar characteristics, but the population is smaller, technology has made significant advances, and there are robots and clones. One such is E.A. Smithe, a borrowed person, a clone who lives on the third-tier shelf of the public library. His personality is an uploaded recording of a deceased mystery writer. Smithe is a library property, not a legal human. The father of Colette Colebrook, a wealthy library patron, has disappeared and proclaimed dead. She decides to check Smithe out of the library because he is the surviving personality of the author of Murder on Mars. A physical copy of that book was the sole item in her father's safe, and it contains an important secret, the key to immense family wealth. Her brother, Conrad, turned up dead in the family home shortly after giving the book to her. Colette has reached the end of her options. She's afraid of the police, and there are others who might want the book's secrets. Smithe is her last hope. Borrowing him might help her find the connection between the deaths and Murder on Mars. Together, they find something far beyond their expectations, something almost anyone would kill for. Though it sort of presents itself as a work of science fiction, it is really a mystery story, a detective story. And that's an interesting thing because the main character is a detective story writer. E.A. Smithe, the main character, is a library resource. He's a reclone. The DNA of the real E.A. Smithe has been collected and a clone has been made. Probably multiple clones have been made. This clone is kept in the public library and can be consulted or even checked out, just like a regular library book. But if a clone does not get checked out enough, if it does not get consulted enough, sort of like brought to a table and spoken with and sort of conversed with, then it will be destroyed. But these reclones have all the thoughts and emotions of humans, but for a variety of reasons, reclones have no rights and are considered property. The book begins with Smithe being consulted by Colette Colebrook. Her father is missing and her brother is dead, and a book that Smithe wrote seems to be the key to solving this mystery. She asks Smithe a few questions about how a secret could be contained within a book. Smithe gives her some very rudimentary answers, sort of leading her into checking him out instead of simply consulting him, which extends his lifeline. This is a mystery story, and it has a lot of mystery story tropes. What I think is very interesting is that the real Smith's writings were hard-boiled variety detective stories, but in order to show a difference between the narration and the actual characters that are involved in the story, Smith's narration is very elevated speech, very eloquent, whereas his characters speak very crassly. This has led those who reclone Smithe to decide that he speaks in the way that he wrote prose. And Smithe often complains about this because he is sort of forced to speak in a very high-minded way, a very almost snooty sort of way. But he doesn't think in that same way. And Smithe, like all the other reclones, is sort of programmed in some way to prevent him from writing. But there's something interesting going on with that. We're told that, but there's a little bit more to say about it. But first, I need to explain what hard-boiled means in relation to detective stories. Hard-boiled detective stories was something that started in the 20s or 30s. It's somewhat of a response to these sort of idealized mystery stories that we get, for example, from Sherlock Holmes, into a much more jaded and cynical perspective. A traditional detective story, or I guess you could say soft-boiled in this sense, or raw, I don't even know, would be someone like Sherlock Holmes. Holmes solves mysteries through deduction and reasoning, almost a superhuman level of reasoning. And while Holmes may engage in physical sort of activity to resolve a crime or a mystery, most of the work is done through logical deduction. A hard-boiled detective solves mysteries with deduction, but often that is not enough. A lot of times, hard-boiled detectives have to solve mysteries with their physicality. This often involves them beating up someone, threatening someone, or getting beat up themselves. It's very much a hard-boiled detective story for the detective or the main character to sort of throw themselves into danger and just see what happens. Often just sort of get beat up by the bad guys, get captured, get tortured, or whatever, in order to get past where a traditional detective would get held up. I don't know of any stories where Sherlock Holmes bursts in and gets punched out and tied up. Although that may exist, I'm not certain. But that's an extremely common thing for hard-boiled detectives. And hard-boiled detectives are cynical and mistrustful and often somewhat criminals themselves or embroiled in criminal activities. They're not very often policemen or law enforcement. They're private detectives and solve a mystery that the law can't or won't resolve. So Smithe is a bit of a 2-for-1, if you will. He speaks in a way that suggests a traditional soft-boiled detective. But a lot of the activities that he performs and does in this story are hard-boiled detective things. He gets captured, he gets beat up, throws himself into a situation to see what will happen. He does things to sort of draw the antagonists out to see what their plans are. Those last-minute, split-second, in-the-moment decisions that save Smithe or that get him on the right side of something. Even though the book is set in the future, it has a 20s or 30s or 40s feel to it. After Colette checks Smithe out, they have a discussion, and she reveals that a copy of a book that Smithe wrote, Murder on Mars, was found in a safe. It was the only thing in the safe at her father's house, and that after her brother gave her that book, he was murdered. She knows there must be a secret in here. She seems to be concerned that someone could be following her or listening. So Smithe agrees to help her to find out what is hidden in this book. But he has no memory of writing this book. When they search, it isn't even listed as a book that Smithe wrote. The Borrowed Man does a lot of things that you would expect out of a really good hard-boiled detective story. Double crosses, subtle hints earlier in the book that foreshadow someone's true allegiances or what they'll actually be doing later. It's a book that rewards a reread. And Smithe himself is an interesting character because he's sort of an anthropomorphized library book. He's motivated to get someone to check him out. And he says that he is required to tell the truth to any patron that takes him out of the library. Although I'm not entirely certain that that's true. Or what is the truth and how much can he conceal? If you enjoy detective stories, I think that you'll like The Borrowed Man. I think that it'll be a very easy recommendation. And it's a really great introduction to Gene Wolfe and Gene Wolfe's writing that doesn't demand too much of you. There's not a lot of pre-knowledge that has to come into it. There's not a lot of the more fantastic stuff that you get with his Book of the New Sun. This is a book that you could read and read no more. There is a sequel, which I have yet to read. Yet this book still has a science fiction idea in it. Gene Wolfe likes to put these really sort of, I guess you would say, almost profound ideas, or really interesting takes in a book, and then sort of like let you stew on it for a little while. And this book definitely has that. That idea is the crux of the mystery. It sort of explains a lot about the mystery, but it does take a long time for that reveal to happen. And when it does, I think it's really great. So there is a bit of fantastic in here. This isn't just a story about, like a new version of humanity sort of being oppressed by an old version of humanity or something like that. Although those elements are absolutely part of the book, there's also fantastic elements. Smithe says at one point that they, reclones, cannot write. He says this when he meets his former wife, Arabella Lee, who is also a reclone. She asks him why it was that they made them reclones so they can't write. And Smithe says something along the lines of, well, if we could write, then it would sort of water down the fiction or the poetry, because Arabella Lee is a poet, that we created in life. They don't want these reclones to become a next generation of poets. Take modern poetry or fiction away from actual humans, at least as qualified by the law, and give it to reclones. this is kind of a pertinent subject in a sense anyways, because this is the sort of thing that we're dealing with right now in a sense with AI, where AI is skimming the internet for books and poetry or whatever, and then regurgitating it, much to the frustration of actual writers, not to mention artists. But I don't think there's any suggestion that Smithe and Arabella and other reclones are not really human. They're obviously biologically human that have had these sort of restrictions put on their brains. It's not really explained how, and their biology isn't explained, although maybe that's in the second book, I don't know. What's really great about this, what I really like about this, is that what Smithe says, whether it's true or not, doesn't make any sense. And the reason I say it doesn't make any sense is that Smithe, a mystery writer, is telling us a mystery story. He says, I. This is not an omnipotent narrator. This is Smithe relating the story to us. And Smithe, of course, has two tones. He has his voice when he actually speaks, which is high-minded and eloquent as he is programmed, so to speak, to do. And then he has his narration, which is much more clipped and abrupt. So how is Smithe telling us a mystery story? Now you might, as I thought at first, think that he gets it sort of like a workaround or a way out because he's relating true events. And maybe there's some sort of, back door there where if it's actually happened to you, then you can tell this story. But that can't be it. That can't be it, because Smithe himself wonders at one point when he meets Arabella and they're on a trip from one library to the next, Smithe wonders, I thought about how she would take this trip of ours and make a poem out of it. A good one, and maybe a great one. Not could take, would take. So that suggests that she can't. That the original Arabella could, but that the current Arabella can't. Well, then why can Smithe tell us this story? What is going on with him that he's not telling us? There's a little bit of talk at the end of the book about how Smithe has to sort of like speak part of the story out and type part of the story out. And maybe, this is just sort of like a little detail that Wolfe missed, and that I'm focusing on minutia too much. I don't know. Anything I know about Gene Wolfe says that is probably not true, or very unlikely. So I have to wonder what it is about Smithe that lets him tell us this story in the first place. Well, there is one thing, I think. Or at least I wonder. And I wonder because we see multiple versions of Arabella Lee, although Smithe does not, I don't think, ever necessarily tell us that it's a different version of Arabella. I wonder if it's the same version of Smithe telling us the story. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know where that would have happened, and I'm just sort of conjecturing that this is possible. But that's the kind of thing that I love about Gene Wolfe's writing in his books, is that they're this really great sort of puzzle that you can sort of turn around and look at different angles, and it really rewards you spending a little extra time with it. If you know why, I'd love to hear somebody else's thoughts about why Smithe can tell us this story, but Arabella can't write a poem. I feel like there's probably some hint in there, or at least I hope that there is. Thanks very much for watching. Gene Wolfe is an absolute favorite writer of mine. I've always enjoyed reading his stuff. I tend to sort of space my reads of his works out because, I don't know, I treasure each one like a fine glass of wine or a really good piece of candy. My name is Virgil, and this is Literally Books. If you like what I'm doing here, I appreciate a like, and a subscribe is great if you think you'd like to see more of me do this. Probably do some more Gene Wolfe in the future. I absolutely would like to do a read of my favorite book of all time, The Book of the New Sun, the only book, by the way, that I've ever spent a large amount of money for a collector's edition of. And to be honest, I really kind of regret it because I actually don't treasure that collector's edition that I got from Folio Society nearly as much as I treasure my paperback originals that I got from Timescape. I like those way more, so I really don't know why I got it, but that's neither here nor there. But I really would like to read that and sort of like spend a lot more time in kind of like a video series about that. So that's something I think I'm kind of tentatively thinking about working on. I'm not quite certain when I want to do that. I'd kind of like to wrap up, or at least get finished, or at least have a lot more ground moved on the Barlow's Guide stuff before I do that. So we'll see how that goes. But that's something that I think I'll probably do in the future. I just don't have real concrete plans about when. Thanks very much for watching. I appreciate your time. Gene Wolfe's The Borrowed Man. Go find it. And the sequel is Interlibrary Loan. That's all. Thanks very much. Bye.